Hello and welcome to a new video. I got a comment this week asking about the EQ limiting compression settings in my template, and I thought, why don't I just make a dedicated video to show you what my template looks like at the moment. Template is always a work in progress for me, and there are always things I'm tweaking. At the moment I'm even working on a second template, but this is my starting point. This is what I always open up when I start. It really helps me to have a starting point where EQ limiting routing has already been fixed and I don't have to look at it anymore. There's quite a lot in here. I'm not going over every single library I use. I'll just put a list of the ones that are in my template at the moment right here. So you can pause the video if you want to have a look at those. But basically, I keep a huge Google Drive document where I write down every library I have and whether I use it, I like it, it's in my template, yes or no, I want to try it out, those kinds of things. So I keep myself up to date with what I'm using, what I'm not using, what I should give another chance, etc. But in the end, we have woodwinds, brass. For percussion, I have separated orchestral percussion with other epic percussion or smaller stuff. So I have this one line which says Orc Above, which means when I cross this line, I know everything above there is orchestral and everything below there is auxiliary, let's say, synthesizers, extra percussion, world instruments, guitars, bass guitars, and everything. Now for synths, there are some of them that I have preloaded that I like. But usually what I do is when I need some kind of keyboard or synth pad, I just have an instance of Omnisphere loaded in that track, which is routed to the correct bus. But then I will just need to select one, and then that will be the one that I use for that project. I often forget what these sound like. This way I always have Omnisphere there. I don't have to go through every single Omnisphere patch to pick the ones that I like and only to add even more tracks to my template. This way, for every track or for a project, I just pick a few that I like and they become then part of the template for that specific project. In terms of percussion, it's also a work in progress. For now, I have a couple of patches loaded. For damage, for example, it's a huge library with a lot of options, and I only have like a couple of them now. As I'm working on new music, I discover new sounds that I like, and I usually make a separate mix of those and save them as a snapshot in Contact, which I will then afterwards load into the new version of the template. For me, percussion is one of those things that I'm always tweaking, always, also because it's, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to mix. And this way I keep discovering new sounds. And I divide my percussion in organic percussion and hybrid percussion. Organic percussion is everything that is a drum and you can beat with a stick. Hybrid percussion is processed in some way or has an electronic edge to it. And then here we have guitars, bass guitars, and world instruments, which I divide in winds, strings, and plucked. And sound design is all the trailer sound design you can think of. Now that's about the instruments. Now the interesting part, grab the mixer for that. So I have divided it in 3 subdivisions, which is basically the layers of routing that everything goes through. So I have subgroups, then all effects and stems. Subgroups is where all the different instruments are coming together in their own separate groups. So for woodwinds, you have piccolos and flutes, then oboes, clarinets, bass clarinets, bassoons, woodwind ensembles. And I do this for every other section as well. So brass, you have divided in horns, trumpets, trombones, low brass, and brass ensembles. So everything comes from the separate instruments into a group, and that group is then processed in its entirety. What I have going on for most of the orchestral instruments is I have a simple EQ to remove all the low stuff that I don't need. And then, depending on which instrument it is, I have 1 or 2 of these API EQs. I was part of a mentorship program by Trevor Morris last year, and he explained that there's like a universal film scoring curve, which is you boost the highs a little bit by 4 dB, then you remove some of the mids around 3K, and then you boost the lows a little bit. And this is what I use for as a starting point for when I applied this EQ. So here in the high woodwinds, I've saved some presets. It's high is a little bit enhanced, mid taken back. That's the base one that I use for every first API, and very often there's some additional EQing that is necessary based on the type of instrument you're EQing. So here for the bassoons, I have a bassoon extra preset where I have just removed a little bit around 500 Hz. If you want to know more about EQing orchestral instruments, Tony Manfredonia made a great video about this, which I will link below. Then for the louder instruments, I also have some compression going on. You see I have mixed the horns quite loud in the mix as well. I built this template when I was doing the Race to Durango remake, so the sound of it is really based on this big 2 Steps from Hell sound, where the horns are obviously very important. And this compression is just to stop it from clipping and to bring up the low dynamics as well. So to recap, all the separate instruments go to a group where they all come together, the same types of instruments. They are then processed as a whole, often by adding a little bit to the low end, removing some of the mid, and adding some to the high end. I'll do a quick A/B test of what it sounds like with and without EQ. The high end gets a little bit more sparkle and it becomes a little bit clearer as a whole. Then next up, the next layer of the mixer is the FX tracks. Everything is sent by buses to their separate FX tracks, and these values, as well as where the faders are here, I can't tell you there's one way to do it. That will really depend on what you like, type of sound you're trying to achieve. Like in this other template I'm working on right now, it has the same instruments, but the reverb settings are very different. So there I am going more for a Skyrim-like big dark fantasy sound with way more reverb, so these settings will be different. For every FX track, the same thing is happening. First off, I apply the Abbey Road curve, where you remove some of the lows, some of the highs before the signal hits the reverb. Then I have one reverb that is Cinematic Rooms by Liquid Sonics, which I have around 2 to 2.5 seconds. For short strings, I believe I have it a little bit lower. True, there it's 1.5 seconds. So it depends on what kind of instrument it is, whether I have a longer or a shorter tail. And this reverb is meant to bring everything in the same room together. Then the second FX track also has the Abbey Road curve, and this has Valhalla Room to give the sound a little bit of a tail. And then finally, I have quite some heavy parallel compression going on in this template. So I have Supercharger GT. It has a mixed bus parallel preset. I just tried it out and I really liked how it sounded. Parallel compression, you have a sound that is very much compressed, too much actually for what sounds realistic. But then you use that to slowly bring up more of the sound into the full mix, so it becomes fuller as a whole. So it's quite a big difference. I really like how it sounds. For the other template I'm working on, it has, like I said, more reverb, but still there's quite some parallel compression. The compressed sound is dry, so it adds this little bit of an upfront sound to your mix, while the reverb then sits behind that. You can still have a very reverby mix, but still have the detail in the sound if that's what you'd like. For the exact settings, it's so dependent on what you want to write. Try things out, slap a preset on there and start listening to things, also in context. And I can really recommend making a remake of music that you like, so you can really try to get your settings as close as that music as you like, and then start working from there. Then finally, we are with the stems. You may have noticed everything is sent to two sidechain buses, sidechain 1 and sidechain 2, the signals from the subgroups as well as the FX signals. This is because I am working with sidechain limiting. You apply a limiter to your stem, but the limiting is not applied based on the signal of that stem alone. It is applied based on a signal that you feed it through a sidechain. In these two tracks, the whole mix before limiting comes together. It has the main signal, it has the reverb signal and the parallel compression. So what comes in here and here is what the unlimited mix sounds like. All the different limiters on the stems are all being processed as if the full mix was playing through this limiter, which is what you can do with this sidechain function. I used to have this big problem where when I was exporting stems, I had a lot of stuff happening on my master. The stems would sound a lot differently compared to the final mix. So in order to avoid this, I have this limiting process. If I would export the stems, I am now always sure that the final export will be exactly the same as when you would stack all the stems together. And this limiter also has a +3 gain applied to bring everything even a little bit more closer in the mix. And that's it. I hope that was helpful. If you have any more questions about any of these settings, just ask me down below. Your template is an everlasting work in progress. For me, it is at least. Good luck working on your own template. If you have any more suggestions or best practices, do leave them in the comments that we can open a discussion about this subject, because it is both very important and very time consuming. As always, a big thank you to my patrons, Danny Lynch, Carl L, Michelo and Matthijs Dierks. And thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.